Good afternoon, good evening, everybody, no matter what time of day it is, no matter where you're watching from. We're glad you're joining us for today's free training session entitled Be a Champion of Change. I am joined by our presenter who is above me right now, Andrea King Smith, and I actually pronounced your name right this time. I never do
Zach,
that.
it only took 4 or 5 years of friendship. It's fine.
Yeah, right. So I'm going to get through our housekeeping and turn it over to her because she's really the one you guys want to talk to, not me. So, some important information about today's session. It is provided for free through the Missouri Professional Training Partnership. You can learn more about our partnership at moapco.org/training. The partnership does not ensure that this training is going to meet any continuing education requirements in any other state besides Missouri. She has presented this in Missouri before, so it's already state certified in this state. You will get a training certificate if you sign in. Right now, if you're watching live, the button that you're going to click currently says visit training partnership training portal. That's a new thing that we just started, so go check it out. But about halfway through this, that button's going to change to sign in and get credit for this training. So make sure that you utilize that button to get your certificate. Give me up to about 72 hours to send those out. I typically do that so that I'm not trying to do that every hour. If you're watching this on demand recording, you're still going to get training proof of training certificate, but you got to click on that floating green button that's below us. And then ask your IT department to whitelist my email address, zachary.dykes@moapco.org. It ensures that you receive your certificate, but it also receives that if you also ensures that if you join our mailing list for future attendance, you're actually going to get that, and it's not going to get bounced back because I do get a lot of bounce backs when we send that mailing list out. So what you're going to see is something similar to this right now. If you're watching live, there's only 4 sessions on this one. So you're going to actually select the one that says Be a Champion of Change and then fill out your information like you want it on your certificate. I'm going to change it a little bit if you've used a name in the past or if you've got your middle initial in there. That's just going to help me keep track of our statistics when I'm trying to keep this going. I kind of have to let our people know how many people we've reached in any given month. So, some important information, use the chat. Seeing the chat interaction makes it a lot easier, Andrea. Otherwise, we're just talking to a brick wall, and it's very hard to do as a presenter, just talk to a brick wall. She's got an interactive portion of this session, so be sure to be ready for that. And if you have any questions, use the Ask a Question feature, or you can type it in chat, and we'll address it as it comes up. Upcoming training, Samantha Hawkins is joining us on the last Monday of the month, November 28th, for her session 10 Things Your Caller Wishes You Understood. And then we've got some stuff in the works for December and probably the start of next year as well. We are taking a break because the first week of December is Dare to Be Great, which I think you're involved in that one, aren't you?
Drew. Drew
Drew.
is.
Okay.
Yeah, Drew is.
I I don't know where I got you from then. Sorry. But we're not going to compete against him for that. And then we'll be coming up again on the holiday season. So we're going to take a little bit of strategic break so that, during peak travel times and peak domestic times, we're not competing for attention. Last but not least, we got some really nifty merch going on right now. We've got a few Missouri APCO Challenge coins left. We have a boatload of Missouri Professional Training Partnership coins left that look like this. And then we've got a nice woven partnership patch that's on PVC backing. And then we have a few of our National Public Safety Telecommunicator 2022 shirts that are still available as well. You can get those at moapco.square.site. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to you. And I kept to my 5-minute time frame.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you again. I know I told you when we were back in the green room, but to publicly give you some flowers. You do an amazing job of coordinating training for your state and for the industry overall. And it's been such an honor to work with you as long as I've been working with you and to know you, friendship levels. So thank you for that and all that you do. And it's okay that you get me and Drew confused because I have no problem being mistaken for him. He's amazing. But thank you all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. And while I'm setting this up, please throw in the chat where you're tuning in from. Let's get some engagement going there. In 1 second. All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Hello to you all. It looks like people are attending from all over the country, which is amazing. I did get to present this in Missouri at the spring conference, and it was great. So if you attended that or at another conference where I presented it, I first appreciate you for coming back. Hopefully this will be just, a brush up for you. If this is your first time presenting this or attending this session, Be a Champion of Change, thank you for being here. And I hope that you leave having learned something new and hopefully also taught us something new by throwing your comments into the chat. It's always kind of a challenge with the virtual setting to engage with one another. So I love the chat. So as often as we can talk and communicate in there with each other, it's going to make this session even better. Really quick housekeeping thing. My session is very interactive. If you have a cell phone, have it out. There's going to be a QR code a couple times in here, or a few different QR codes, where we'll do some interactive live polling to get everyone's feedback on a couple different topics. And also my LinkedIn QR code will be in here, so you can connect with me there as well. I'm always looking to make connections. So let's get started. All right. So this is Be a Champion of Change. Let me go back up to the beginning. So we've all been there where there's a new major change that's coming, and word spreads to the floor, right? And then what happens next? Oftentimes panic sets in and chaos ensues, and everyone starts freaking out, and rumors begin to spread like wildfire. Often sick leave skyrockets, and droves of phone calls sometimes start to go to the union if you have a union in your state. And then enters damage control, and usually whoever is implementing the change has to walk some things back and try to regain control. And it's typically a wild ride, right? Well, today we're going to talk about some of these significant change events that take place in the 911 center and how to improve the culture that surrounds these changes to mitigate resistance from your employees or from you yourself. As we go through this session, there's something that I want you to keep in mind, and I'm going to repeat it to you at the end. But something to know is that people respond to change typically in one of four ways. They become critics, bystanders, victims, or their change champions. And we want to talk about how to bring out those change champions today. I love this quote. It says, "Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their mind cannot change anything." And it's important because it really speaks to the mindset. In order to embrace any type of change, it starts in your mindset. And so if we can start to change the way that people are thinking about things, particularly when it comes to embracing change, then we'll start to see that needle move. Let's talk about some objectives. The course is going to give you like a basic overview of change management that utilizes your greatest resource, which is your frontline employees. And by the end of the course, the objectives are to discuss reasons that change is imminent in 911. We're going to talk about some reasons why personnel are resistant to organizational change. We'll discuss the definition of a change champion and reasons why one is needed. We're going to identify the ways that a change champion can motivate employees to embrace change, and then understand the benefits that a change champion can have and the impact they have on workplace culture. So we're going to do all that. And then at the end, we'll discuss a little bit how you can apply these same principles that we're going to learn to your personal life and be your own change champion as well. I see you here. It's Linda from the Evergreen State College Police Department in Washington. Hello. Thank you. It's just really exciting to see all of you guys. So let me tell you a little bit about me. My name is Andrea King Smith. The Smith is new to me, so I'm still getting used to it. And you might see places where it just says Andrea King. But I have a background that includes 15 years in public safety. I spent most of my career in the PSAP. I worked for the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. I'm in the 911 center for 14 of those years, where I was a call taker, a dispatcher, a trainer, a supervisor. Um, I'm also am active with APCO and NINA. I currently sit on the NINA Committee for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and a couple different NINA work groups. Um, and to sum it up, I am a trainer, I am a leader, and I myself am a change champion. Recently, I say recently, but now it's been about a year. It's been 11 months and like a couple days. I transitioned to the private sector where I'm now a customer success manager with Carbine. At Carbine, we're redefining emergency collaboration, and we're doing amazing things. But a little bit more about me. I believe in the words of James Kouzes, who is the author of the Leadership Challenge, and that is my book recommendation. If you haven't read it, it is an awesome book. It's back behind me on my shelf because I often refer to it. But the author in that book said, when leaders are doing their best, they model the way. And so it's important to know that changing the culture is not an overnight process. And you, as a leader in your 911 center, and that leader being from any rank that you sit in, you have to be committed to that change in order to affect it. And also, there is my QR code. So please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. Let's connect. All right, so let's talk about change. I want you all to think of a time where there was a major change happening where you worked and your personnel was resistant to it. Is it still there? Yeah. So while you're thinking about it, this is where one of our first interactive polls is going to come in. It's really simple. On the next screen, there's going to be a QR code. All you do is scan it, and it's going to ask the question, what type of major change have you experienced in your 911 center where people were resistant? So we're thinking like CAD upgrades, something like that. So let me get that launched. And what's cool about it is while you're submitting your suggestions, it's going to pop up in a live word cloud. So we'll get to all see it there. And while you are, let's see, if you have questions about it, throw it in the chat and I'll see if I can help you. But I do see some people joining in now. We have one there, CAD vendor change. So go ahead and throw your things in there. But while you're doing that, I'll tell you about the change that I remember very vividly. It was the day we announced that we were going to have a new CAD upgrade. And at first, everyone was intrigued. We hadn't had a new CAD upgrade in a very, very long time. So people were just curious about what that meant. But then the influencers got involved and they started talking about things that they had heard about the new CAD. Things like you wouldn't be able to use your mouse anymore or your keyboard anymore. You were only going to be able to use your mouse. And um, that you wouldn't have more than one working screen anymore, and all these things that actually began to scare our dispatchers. So there was panic. There were people that were just really stressed about what this new change was going to bring to them. So our leadership team thought, well, let's start training on it. If we start training everyone on the new CAD, then maybe it'll calm everyone down and they'll see that it's not what the influencers said it was going to be. But when they started training on it, it brought in a new problem. Fear set in because it was so different from what we currently had. Dispatchers were very fearful of how they could adjust to this change, and it drew a lot of resistance from it. Now we fast forward to after the CAD implementation, and everything is about as okay as it could be. But it was really difficult ride to manage, especially being in leadership, trying to keep people encouraged and understanding and accepting of the change that was to come. And what I want to talk about is ways we could have mitigated that and how you can mitigate it yourself. So let's look at some of the different changes that you guys came up with in the poll. We have implementation of a QA/QI program. That's huge. QA is in there again. CAD vendor change, and on-call schedule. Schedule changes are always huge changes that people are not very receptive to. High turnover, moving into a building with other agencies. So yes, like that four-letter C word, consolidation or co-location. Those are huge changes that bring a lot of resistance about. So great. These are all great options. And as you can see, they're all very similar. So some of the ones that I brought up were organizational changes, like major changes in the business operations of an organization. Scheduling changes. So, for example, my previous agency changed just the call takers from 410s to 5/8s, not the dispatchers, just the call takers. So you can imagine how well that went over with the staff. Leadership and management changes, and this is a big one that can cause a lot of ruffled feathers sometimes, especially for people that did not get the position. And then CPE changes, upgrading to a new phone system or upgrading a CAD or RMS platform. These are necessary changes, but they're never really fun changes. If you didn't get a chance to throw anything into the poll and you want to throw something into the chat, please feel free to. So you may notice that a lot of these things have a similar feel. When we've all faced some sort of change or rollout that caused fear and resistance among our people. And all of our stories probably sound a little familiar. So, two things that I want you to take for this: one, you are not alone. And two, there are ways to mitigate that negativity that comes with new implementations, and that's by developing and utilizing your change champions. Has anybody here ever rolled out a major change, and everything went swimmingly well? If you have, let us know in the chat. So let's talk about why we need change, because we all know change is inevitable, but do we ever stop and think about reasons that we may need change? Or can anybody tell me reasons that you think that we need in the 911 world to embrace change? Just check in my chat, make sure it's working. Drew, the next generation depends on change. Yes, absolutely. That is definitely one of the reasons why we need change. And some of that big change that we talk about the next generation needing, it's technology, right? Yes, Sandy, technology. Technology was my next slide. Technology has evolved from the way that we learn to the way that we get our news, the way that we communicate with one another. Technology has changed the way that we operate in our daily lives. So, the public safety industry, we can't expect people to continue to conform to antiquated communication methods forever, right? We have to start implementing changes in our operations in order to effectively serve our citizens and save lives. So let's take a minute to talk about technology changes in 911. Thank you, Sandy and Drew, for your feedback. The long gone are the days of somebody calling 911 from a wireline phone and their name and address is picked up on the caller ID, so we know who they are and we can call them back. Those days don't exist anymore. In fact, most people don't even have a landline phone today. And if you ask Gen Z, they probably don't even know what a landline phone is. And according to the National Center for Health Statistics from a 2018 study, it showed that 54.9% of homes in America rely solely on wireless telephones. And speaking to the younger generations, more than 3 in 4 adults aged 25 to 34, they live in wireless only households. And that was in 2018. What happened in 2020? The pandemic, the way that we operate completely changed. A lot of people have gone digital to the cloud and other means. So those landline phones really are non existent today. And this data speaks to the main reason that technology change is important in a career where obtaining the location of your caller, it really is the number one objective. All right, so you may recognize this image. It's from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And there's an entire section on their website that discusses transitioning to next generation 911. It specifically says that NG 911 will allow 911 centers to accept and process a range of information from responders and the public, including text, images, video, and voice calls. So I'm curious, sound off in the chat if your centers are prepared to accept all of this data today. If you are on that leading edge of change, we want to hear from you. And if you're not, how many of you are making preparations to your centers to accept this type of data? That these are all huge changes, right? And they require big changes to the way that our centers currently operate. David says that we're there. I love to hear that. And so I'm sure, David, that you guys have gone through some change resistance when you were trying to implement some of these new technologies, right? All right. As I'm sure you all can imagine, the resistance you'll receive from your personnel when you begin this type of change. Zach, I love hearing that Missouri is in the process of preparing to roll out for next gen. That's awesome. So it's important to know that the change, if it's not already there, it's coming. And how do you prepare your staff for that, to embrace that? Michelle says text 911 is implemented across Alabama. That's awesome. Right? What is happening? All right. So before we get into what a change champion in, let's talk about the reasons why we resist change. And in order to combat resistance, you must first acknowledge people's resistance as a reality. It's also important to understand that each person may have a different reason or why behind their hesitance to change. So, we're going to talk about some of the most prevalent reasons. But before we get to that, I'd love your input. I really would like to hear what you've learned about people's reasons for change. So, what have you experienced as reasons that people don't change? It's another quick poll. Go ahead and scan the QR code and drop in your reasonings. I'll do it too. We'll give it a couple minutes. All right, we got some people in there talking now. Fear is one in there. People are used to the way that we do it. It's not in our comfort zone. Good. What other ones can you guys think of? If you're not able to join on the QR code, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Out of habits. Yes, I love this. I see some big ones that are fear and out of our comfort zone. Huge. There's a couple more people talking, so we'll give it a minute more. Ooh, frustration. In the chat, David says overload, one or more thing to manage. Yes, we're going to talk about that, David. Not understanding why it's needed. Absolutely. That's a good one. It's scary. Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Continue to throw those in there. I'm going to take a snapshot of this word cloud at the end of the chat so you can keep throwing them in there. But I'm going to go to this next slide so that we can talk about some of the reasons. One of the big ones that you guys saw there was fear, right? That was the first thing that I came up with. Fear of the unknown. So this means to be afraid when you have little or no information about something that's impending. Fear is a natural reaction for some people when they're faced with imminent change. And this fear can be due to many different reasons. They can be personal or professional. And while the rational side of our brain knows that whatever the change is, it won't be the end of the world, the fear of the uncertainty, it oftentimes overpowers that rationale. And as a leader, it's important not to disregard somebody's fear of what to come, but rather embrace it as their reality and understand that that might be a reason they are resistant to your type of the change that you're wanting to implement. So another reason, and David, this kind of speaks to what you put in there, feeling overwhelmed, stressed, experiencing burnout. So if your 911 center is fully staffed with no vacant positions, go ahead and let us know in the chat. And while we're waiting on that, I'll just jump in there and say that most centers are not. And I think we all know that. But if you are, we need to have another session because we need to learn from you. But seriously, the majority of us are facing staffing crises, right? Which creates the need for overtime, which creates burnout, and people stop volunteering for it, which then creates the need for you know the word well, mandatory overtime. And we begin to see this vicious cycle. And I'm sure you've already done this, especially my leaders in the group. But if you haven't, just imagine the stress that your people in this cycle are feeling. Jessica, we gotta know the secret to being fully staffed. Because again, we know that it's plaguing our industry right now. But congratulations on that. I like to tell people all the time, while it is an industry issue, staffing shortages, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There are some centers out there that are doing a lot of things really right, and it's keeping people in the seats. And so we need the people with that experience from those centers to speak to the industry, speak to us, and let us know what you're doing, because people are looking for different reasons. Like Lisa says, what is it like to be fully staffed? Exactly. So we're talking about being overwhelmed and stressed and burned out. And I like to correlate it with a more personal story. So has anyone here been like me, where you have a million things going on at home and the kids are driving you crazy, and your hardest kid, which is usually your mother-in-law's kid, is seemingly no help, and there's a pile of laundry almost to the roof, and you've stopped for fast food 3 times already because you just don't have the time to thaw and cook something, and you're just barely staying afloat. And then a pandemic hits and school shut down, and now you're forced to figure out how to educate your kids from home. And then you go to work and your leadership tells you that you're getting ready to change all the keyboards on the floor. They're going to be brand new keyboards. They're those little small keyboards where they don't have a lot of they've made the keys a lot smaller, and I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about, and they suck. So we're getting ready to change all these keyboards, and also we're changing our staffing. We're splitting it, and half of you guys are going to go to a backup center. And no, we've never done this before, but we got to figure out a way to quarantine. And all of this change is happening at one time. If you were like me in that situation, did you have the capacity to process any of that change? Because I definitely didn't, and it stressed me out. So when your employees are feeling overwhelmed and stressed, they lack the capacity to absorb and process change sometimes. And this is why it's important to consider timing and other contributing factors like a pandemic when you're planning to implement change. Now, we all know that there are some things that you just can't wait on, right? Your cat is out of contract, you've been year to year for the last 5 years, and it's time for you to upgrade to a new one, or your phone system, it's time for you to look at a new one, and you just have to pull the plug. You have to do it, but you have to make sure that you're still considering what your employees might be dealing with before deciding the timing for making those changes. All right, so we're talking about reasons that people resist change, and a faulty implementation approach is one of the really big ones. People resist change when the implementation approach is off. So, what does that mean? It's when the decision maker does not seek out buy in from the employees, which demonstrates a lack of regard for the impact that that change might have. So, for example, if your center works 12-hour shifts and you decide that effective in 2 weeks, we're going to 5/8, but you didn't seek out opinions from the floor first, you didn't allow them time to figure out how this is going to affect their life, you're off to a bad start. And if you don't think that type of change is going to affect someone's life, you're really off to a bad start, because it is. Another demonstration of this is lack of transparency and no clear roadmap. So if you're blindly shooting arrows, your personnel will know and they won't support you through this change. So it's important to recognize the times when it's necessary to engage your people before making a decision. It's also important to have clear roadmaps for success with milestones and benchmarks to measure your progress, so you can show your team how they're supposed to forge ahead. I go back to the caveat of, we know that sometimes there's just changes that have to be made, but that's not every change. Sometimes you can sit and take a moment and bring some minds to the table and determine, feedback from the floor before you make the change. At my previous 911 center, we had a captain at the time who I think did this very well. He created what's called the Captain's Council. And it was a mix of people from the floor, call takers, dispatchers, a couple supervisors, people from our PBX, who once a month or once a quarter, whatever the set cadence was, they would meet with him. They had a 30-minute meeting. It took him 30 minutes out of his day, and he would present the ideas he had or some upcoming changes, and the captain's council would take that information. They'd go back to the floor and they'd seek out opinions. And they were very serious about their job. They had like a Google spreadsheet with that they were tracking their feedback on. And then when their next meeting came, they presented the findings to him. And now, whether he took their advice or made decisions based off of the info he gave them or not, we'll never know, right? But what we do know is that when those decisions were made, the floor could say they had input, and it made for a lot of the change to be better received. Okay. So another reason people resist change, a climate of mistrust. And this is a heavy one. It usually involves a deep-rooted culture of toxicity. When certain people are leading change and there's a history of issues, sometimes old wounds are reopened and historic resentments are remembered. This is usually present when employees don't trust the leadership, employees don't trust each other, the leaders don't trust each other, and it's really, really hard to combat. Honestly, sometimes it can take generations to fully eradicate and correct this type of environment. And if this exists in your center, the first thing as a leader trying to implement change you have to do is acknowledge it. It may not be your fault, and you may not have even been there when the issues began. But you have to remember that accountability goes a long way towards reconciliation. And when the staff can see that their leader is accountable, it makes them more receptive to any change that their leader is trying to implement. But we don't have experience with that, right? We don't have that toxicity in our 911 centers. Okay, so one more that I wanted to talk about when you're talking about reasons people resist change. It's a departure from the current state, and I saw that in the poll a couple times. That it's different from what we're used to. It's just not what we expected. So, what are the two things that people hate the most? It's change and staying the same. And these are also two of the most inevitable things that you can expect in a 911 center, that things will stay for the same forever until one day there's like imminent change. It's going to stay the same, and then boom, we're changing CAD next week. We have a new phone system coming. So you got to remember that routine is important to your call takers and dispatchers, and that'll help you to empathize with their resistance to disrupt their day to day. I told you guys at the beginning that I recently, it's not super recent anymore. A year ago, I left the 911 center and I joined the private sector. And it was the scariest thing that I've ever done. And anyone in here who has made that leap, I know a couple of you guys are in here, Drew, Decorah, you probably can relate to me that it was a scary, scary thing to do. Well, even though I was no longer a call taker or dispatcher, I was a supervisor at the time, my schedule was always pretty set. But when I went to change to the private sector, I took a few weeks off of work to just kind of decompress. And then my first day on the job, I was in New York City doing training, onboarding. I spent a week in New York where we got up in the morning, we walked to the office in Manhattan, we spent the day working, we went out to dinner afterwards, and then we went home to the hotel, and we did this 5 days in a row, and it was great. Well, the first day of my second week, I was back at home, and I was sitting in my new loft office at my desk that my husband had just put together while I was in New York. And I had my laptop, and I was like, okay, what do I do next? And I remember calling my boss, and I'm like, Brett, what am I supposed to be doing? And he's like, don't you have meetings on your calendar? I'm like, yeah, but what do I do after that? He's like, onboarding, training. I'm like, well, I finished that. And I really struggled for like the first couple of weeks here trying to understand, like, what am I supposed to be doing? And what I realized, it's because it was such a departure from what I used to do. I used to go to work, and even though I wasn't taking calls, I knew what time I had to be on the bridge. I knew when I was going to meet with certain employees, what time I was going to go to lunch, and my schedule was set. And then this was something completely different. My day to day was disrupted. I didn't have a set schedule anymore. And so I tell you that story to say that that is something that can really derail somebody when you interrupt their normal flow because of a new change. So it can create resistance. So how do you kind of help your employees through that? Again, you have to empathize with the fact that this is different for them. Haley, it sounds like you've been there before, right? Um, and teach them a new flow. Teach them how this change is going to how they can build a new schedule around this change that's coming, what their new schedule should look like, what their new workflows should look like. You teach them that, and it'll help them become more comfortable with the change that you're trying to bring. Sandy says, I thought about doing it, but have not thought about the schedule change as much. Good point. Exactly. So think about how that's going to impact you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So now that we've recognized some of the key reasons for change resistance, how do we mitigate it? So here are the reasons that we talked about: fear of the unknown, feeling overwhelmed or stressed or burnout, having a faulty implementation approach, a climate of mistrust, a departure from the current state. And if you may recognize them because the word cloud that you all built had just about everything on this list, right? We all recognize that these are reasons that people resist change. Well, this is where your change champions enter. These are going to be your ace in the hole employees, the people that are going to help usher in the new changes, and they do this by modeling the way. So, what is a change champion and what do they do? These are people that clearly see the vision and they believe in it. They believe in the change that is taking place and they desire to advocate for it. These people can easily identify resistance, usually because it comes to them and they strive to disrupt it. These are going to be the people that motivate others to embrace change. So we're going to talk about the attributes of change champions a few times going forward. And as we do, I want you to start thinking about people that embody these characteristics that you work with. They might be your peers. They might be your subordinates. It might be you. And honestly, sometimes that's the hardest one for people to acknowledge, is that you may be the change champion that your 911 center is missing. So as we continue to go through this, think about those people, identify those people, and then we're going to have a call to action at the end. You'll read and hear about major companies that hire outside consultants to be change champions, and that has its place in some institutions. However, in your 911 center, where nobody knows what we do better than us, the most effective change champion is already right within your organization. Right. So, knowing what we've learned so far, I have a quick question. Does your change champion have to be a formal leader or a member of the management team, a member of the leadership team? Just throw a yes or no in the chat real quick. I see a lot of resounding no's. That is great. David says no title required. And then the other David says the line level is the best. And you're absolutely right. Your most effective change champion will be your informal leaders, your informal leaders. They are your influential frontline workers. Exactly what you said, Zach. So there are some key things that your change champion will do to motivate and influence their peers to embrace change. First, they lead by example. And this isn't something that you have to teach them because they're already doing it. They walk the walk and they talk the talk. And because of this, their peers already look up to them. So think about those people that exist in your center. Maybe it's you. These people focus on the mission and the values. They have a clear understanding of the values and they can relate why we do what we do to the mission. This will help them to explain how the change supports the mission that they believe in. Your change champion will encourage their peers to give feedback. And because they are that influential person and informal leader, a lot of negativity among employees, it already will fall in their lap. It probably already does. So your change champion will encourage their peers to submit feedback through appropriate channels rather than spreading negativity. So while your change champion likely already exists, sometimes they don't even know who they are. And this is where you, as a leader, has to come in. It's vital that you identify, empower, and encourage your change champion. And also know this, you may not believe it, but your most negative employee could be a change champion in the rough. And I have a story about that. So, where I worked at my previous 911 center, we had an employee. I'll call her Michelle because that's her name. And she was that employee. She was super influential because she had tenure, she was loud, people listened to her, and she just, always had something to say. But we struggled. We had a lot of struggles during our time together. And lots of accountability conversations had to take place when I became her supervisor. And so one day, you remember I told you about my center went from 4 10s to 5 8s just for the call takers. One day in briefing, before briefing began, I walked in through the back door of the room. So people really, unless you turn around, you didn't know I was there. And I hear this employee, Michelle, and she is going off about this new change that's coming. She's telling all these brand new baby call takers who have honestly never even experienced life of 4 10s about how them moving to 5 8s is going to be the end of the world for them. Their lives are going to be miserable and it's not fair. And they need to call the union. She's pulled out her phone and told them to take out a pen and paper so she can give them the phone number to the union president. She's going off. Mind you, this change has no impact on her. She's a dispatcher, she's got seniority. She's not going to feel the change at all. She is going off. And so eventually I had to shut it down and have a conversation with her after briefing about it. And while we had had many discussions before about her behavior, I tried to change my tactic up a little bit with this one. I told Michelle that she was a leader. I told her because of her voice, because she has a voice, people follow her. She has the ability to naturally lead people. And she also has a history of leading them to the dark. And I told her I needed her to lead them to the light. I explained to her that she's got to be able to use her voice for good. And I asked her to do that. I asked her to do me a favor, do the agency a favor, use your voice for good. And so while that conversation didn't change everything, but things did slowly start to change. This was the employee that you didn't even place a sit along with because you just never knew what was going to come out of her mouth. And things started to change to where she became a trainer and she started mentoring some of the younger crew. And, while I don't take full credit for that, I think what changed was empowering her, letting her know that she had a voice and that she could use it, and empowering her and encouraging her to use that voice for good. So she ultimately subconsciously became a change champion for our 911 center just by kind of just changing her direction a little bit. So that's how you empower and encourage your people. You do things like that. You let them know that they can use their voice for good. You also invite them to the table. When it's appropriate, you include them in strategy meetings. You ask their opinion on things. You make them part of the process and get their buy in. And if they believe in what you're doing, they will champion it for you, even if they don't know they're championing. So you've got to make sure that you're empowering your change champions. So, some more attributes of your change champion. When you're identifying your existing change champions, look for your employees who are consistently focused on solutions rather than problems. They have a clear understanding of the organization and they display that in their performance by connecting what they do to the mission. This employee is positive in nature. They communicate the positives in their daily walk. They're not afraid to speak up, whether it's to leadership or to the naysayers. They're procedurally compliant. You're looking for people that already understand policy and practice it. And lastly, these people are people focused. They consistently display regard for their peers as people. So think about the people who are often coordinating potlucks or bake-offs for the shift, or the people who are always warm and welcoming to the new employees. These are just some examples of where you can find your change champions. When I was, especially when I was a dispatcher, I made it a point to stop by the academy every time we had a new group in their learning because I wanted to just make sure they knew a warm face for when they came out onto the floor. Our academies, they spend X amount of time in the sterile environment with only people they see are their instructors and themselves. And then we throw them onto the floor into training. And, sometimes we have a tendency to eat our young in 911. And I wanted to make sure that when they came out to the floor, at least they could remember one familiar face. So think about those people, the ones that go out of their way and take the initiative to try and bring people together in the center. Those are the people you want to use as your change champions. I love this slide because it could all be so simple, right? How to improve culture in your office, be happy, be awesome, and then help others with one and two. It could all be so simple. Let's talk about how a change champion can have a huge impact on the culture of your center. When a change champion is effective, the impact will be seen in the form of buy in from your personnel. The narrative of your negative influencers, it'll be changed. They'll start to, again, even if they don't know it, they're going to start to promote your change. They're going to help you rebuild the trust between management and the frontline employees. And overall, you'll begin to see a more positive work environment. And that's by using your change champion because they're on that front line. And if you haven't picked up by now, I love to correlate these things with some stories and examples. So this one is about my kids. I am a new bonus mom. I have three beautiful stepchildren. And my oldest, Christopher, he's 15 and he's an athlete in high school. He plays football and he's right now in that transition phase where he's like relying on his natural athleticism and not really doing the work. And his grades started slipping because of it. He's a cool kid on campus, but we're trying to keep him together. So me and dad are telling him things like, now is when your grades matter most, and every decision you make is going to have an impact on your future. And, you're an athlete you're a student before you're an athlete, and all these things that I swear are going in one ear and out the other. So we tried to change our tactic and we talked to one of our family members who used to play in the NFL. And we asked him if he would talk to Chris, and he did. And I swear, we sat there and he told him all of the same things that we told him. And I'm sitting there like, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. We tried that method, so let's figure out something else. But then I started to watch my son, and his body language was different. He was listening in a way that he wasn't listening when mom and dad were talking. And then things actually started to change. He started to actually go outside and condition and work out. And he realized that if his grades are too low, he wouldn't get to play football on Friday night. So he made sure his grades were up, and things really started to change. And I'm like, I don't understand. We told him all of the same things until it hit me that it wasn't cool when mom and dad were telling him, but when somebody that he could relate to was telling him, it made it a lot more cool. And that's how your change champion impacts the culture and makes change. It's not mom director or dad director telling them that this change is going to be great for them. It's their peers, the people who they already look up to because they're influential in the 911 center, that's telling them, hey, you should really check out what the new CAT is going to do. Hey, this new phone system has a lot of really cool features. This is how I use it, and I think you could use it too, like this. That's what's going to make your people want to change. And so the impact of a change champion can be felt throughout the entire center. So, the next part of this I really wanted to go on quickly was, how do you take all of these things that we talked about that are going to make your center so much better and take them out of the center and apply them to your own life? I got some feedback the very first time I did this, which is why I've included it now. And it's actually even spawned into a new session that I'll be presenting about how to champion for yourself. People want to know how to become their own change champions. So let's talk about it for a moment. Is there anyone in the chat that wants to let us know about a huge goal of theirs? Promotion, college, starting a business. Anyone got anything really big, something that when you implement it, it's going to disrupt your daily routine? I'm going to give a few minutes for you guys to think about that and throw something in the chat, or a few seconds. Anybody got a big goal going on? All right. While you guys are thinking, I'm going to share mine. Sandy, I love that. Possibly retirement. That's a great one. I'll share mine while you guys are thinking about what you're going to put in there. So I really want to obtain my EMP designation. And I know that once I finally commit to prepping for that, my life is going to be disrupted for a little while. And if I can be vulnerable for a moment, I'm also a little intimidated by the material. So I keep talking myself out of it. And we often do this, right? We talk ourselves out of an opportunity because of all the reasons that we talked about earlier. Fear of the unknown, it's a departure from the current state. We have faulty implementation approaches, but we can be champions for our own personal growth and change too. We just have to look at some facts first. So let me show you some data that I came up with. But these are some statistics that we might be able to relate to at some point in our life. Did you know that 68% of Americans feel that they are overqualified for the position they currently hold? 68%. Some of you guys are in this session right now. So why do we stay in those positions? A lot of it has to do with the lack of confidence in ourselves to step into our new potential. Another statistic, 85% of the world's population is affected by low self-esteem. That's a staggering number, 85%. And these are reasons that we don't take opportunities. We don't look for, we don't think we can take that promotion to supervisor. We don't think we can, step out and become CTOs because we're scared. But then for those of us that do finally take that step into something new, oftentimes we feel we're not worthy of being there. Has anyone here heard of imposter syndrome? If you haven't, I'll tell you what it is. Imposter syndrome is defined as the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. According to a research paper that I read, it said that 70% of the US population has experienced imposter syndrome. People with imposter syndrome doubt their achievements and their ability and fear that they may be a fraud. Imposter syndrome breeds a toxic level of perfectionism and anxiety. It's real. And I've experienced it myself. And honestly, we can have an entire course on that alone, and we will soon. But for now, just know that if you've ever felt this way, you're not alone. So, how do we overcome these statistics and step into our own hard earned and well deserved success? You have got to become your own change champion. You have to learn to bet on you. So apply for the position that you think you're underqualified for, or ask that industry disruptor that you admire for a virtual coffee date. And if I can speak to myself for a moment, enroll in the classes that you keep telling yourself you don't have time for, like, EMP. It may sound scary, but it doesn't have to be. So let's go over a few steps really quickly that will help you become your own change champion. So, step one, and the first thing that you have to do is define the changes that you want to make happen for yourself. Once you've done that, and trust me, that is a big step, take some time to understand and accept your emotions and don't rush that process because making a change in your life can have an impact on you and those around you. And the thought may bring about many different emotions. So, allow yourself to feel them because doing this guides you to the next step, which is to analyze what this change means to you. How important is it? How will you be affected by it? How will others be affected by it? You have to think about all of these things before you make your approach. So I mentioned a couple times that when I left the 911 center, it was the scariest thing that I've ever done. And it was, there were so many emotions that came with it. And I didn't even realize the amount of people that would be impacted by it. Sure, my immediate family, but some of my friends in 911 that, cried when I told them that I was leaving. And I didn't realize how it was going to impact me as well. So I had to take the time to think about all these things. And honestly, I didn't even apply for the position until I had the time to process what this change would mean. So you have to remember that change requires a process, and you have to make your approach after you have that process well thought out, and don't rush it. So think about all the steps that change that you're trying to implement in your personal life will require. or your professional life, and then think about the steps that you didn't think about. Come up with a plan to implement the change. Having a plan for your implementation will help you feel more confident in your decision. So after making your plan, you have to work the plan. But you must make sure you celebrate yourself first. You have to acknowledge the small victories. So come up with a way to celebrate each benchmark that you achieve, and remember that no victory is too small to celebrate. So once I did finally apply for this new job, and I got accepted to the first process, I celebrated. My husband and I went out to dinner to celebrate um, new horizons that are possible, and even if they don't happen, just taking the step, having the courage to take the step. And then when I passed that first screening part and I got moved on to the next interview, I celebrated again. I went out and bought myself a new shirt because it was all virtual. I didn't need pants. I just needed a top. But I bought myself a new shirt for my next interview, and when I got through that, I celebrated myself again. And that's what keeps you going. You have to figure out ways to motivate yourself. That's funny, Zach. And then finally, take ownership of the change and implement it. Because when you own your decision, you have power over it. You get to enjoy a sense of pride and accomplishment for completing a goal that you set for yourself. And nobody can take that away from you. I got through my full process of interviews and demonstrations and background check and all of that, and then it was time to make a decision. I was given an offer, and I had to decide, was I going to accept this offer or not? And I only had like 2 days to do this. So then we started to panic because I didn't want to leave my 911 center because I was mad. And I thought that I was doing this because I was mad. I was mad at my boss's boss, who in my mind, thought just hated me. She was never gonna, support anything that I did. I was never gonna promote any higher, and I had to leave because I had to get away from her. But I finally had to take a step back and own my own decision and realize that no, the reason that I'm making this change is for me. It's because I want to be able to reach a wide range of 911 of my 911 peers. I wanted to be able to be on the cutting edge of technology and help bring people into the technological age of 911, that next generation or future generation of 911. And when I finally started to understand that, I was able to take ownership of this change that I was making, and then I had complete power over it. It was no longer my boss's boss who had power over me leaving. And it's important that you take that step and you recognize why you're making whatever the change is. Sandy, when you finally sign the papers for your retirement, you have to have ownership of it. Otherwise, you'll sit and wonder, did I make the right decision often? So when you have that ownership, you can accept it more, and nobody can take that away from you. So it's important to be your own change champion, to usher in change into your personal life the same way that you can at work. You just have to bet on you. So wrapping up here, I want you guys to remember that change is inevitable, and we all know this. And hopefully, this course has equipped you with tools to combat change resistance. I told you at the beginning, and I'm going to reiterate it here. You've got to remember, people respond to change in one of four ways. They will either be critics, bystanders, victims, or change champions. So as you go back to work and you go back to your centers and you're starting to think about what you learned today, I leave you with some questions. Who are your change champions? Are you developing them? Are you encouraging them? Are you the change champion that your center needs? I encourage you to think about these things, and I challenge you to empower your change champions and allow your 911 centers to reap the benefits. And with that, I thank you all for being here. And if anyone has any questions, comments, or anything, please feel free to throw them in the chat while we have, I think, like a minute or two left. Anything at all. Let me go scroll back up. And thank you guys all for joining and talking in the chat. Thank you so much. All right, Zach, are you there still? Are you gonna jump back in?
I am. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to come in and do this for us.
Of course.
Everybody here is still here. Please don't forget to click the floating green button that's down below the screen. That way you can sign in and get a training certificate here in a couple of days on attending this class. And
Yes.
if you have any questions for Andrea, give it a few more seconds before we end it, and then Andrea and I are going to go back into the after action green screen and talk about things and make sure everything's good. So
Thank you so much. I threw back up my about me screen in case anybody is active on LinkedIn. Please scan my code and let's connect. I would love to continue having conversations with you all, and hope to meet some of you guys hopefully soon as well.
okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and end it. Thank you guys for being here. And again, our next session will be on the 28th of November, and we will see you there.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
The question is, since they switched this, how do I shut this off?
New technology.
Yeah. I'm so lost. I swear that the last time I was in here, it said end session. So let's. There it is. I was in the wrong spot. Okay, so that was a minute of embarrassment. I'll see you guys later.